Hello friends, welcome back. Today I want to tell you a story about love born in this last place anyone would expect. A love that did not begin with laughter or gentle words, but with a life pulled back from the edge. This is a story about invisible borders, carved into the land, about enemies, taught to hate one another, and about one man who chose to step across a line no one else dared to cross. The story opens beneath the merciless blaze of the western sun. Along the dry ridge, weather-beaten border posts leaned at crooked angles, driven deep into the red earth like the final bones of a dying frontier. No map drawn by white hands marked this land more clearly than those sun-bleached stakes. They stood as a silent threat to anyone reckless enough to pass beyond them. Dust drifted across the ground in slow, weary sheets, pushed by a harsh wind that carried the sharp scent of crushed sage and the bitter trace of old gunfire. It was here on the outer edge of Apache Nation land that Ash Wolf rode, 26 years old, moving with the certainty of a man who felt these hills through instinct rather than sight. He guided his pony up from the southern trail just after noon, the sun hanging high enough to scorch the stone and bend the air into shimmering waves. Ash Wolf was a warrior trained for conflict, but there was a quiet weight to him. A solitude that set him apart. Assigned to this lonely stretch of border 2 days earlier, his orders were simple: watch the prisoners turn back trouble, keep the line intact. He expected dust, towering saguaros, and silence. He was a man who searched for peace in a land that rarely allowed it. But what he saw that day made his hands tighten on the reins. His pony shifted nervously beneath him. There, lashed to the tallest post along the ridge, hung a body, a young woman, white, no more than 22. She was suspended by a thick hemp rope, her arms stretched painfully overhead. The bindings cut deep into her wrists, the flesh beneath swollen and torn. Ash Wolf remained still in the saddle, his dark eyes absorbing the cruelty before him. A rough wooden plank had been nailed beside her. The paint was fresh, still bleeding under the heat. A message, a warning. Her dress, once pale blue, the kind worn by farm girls to Sunday service, was ripped and stiff with dried blood and mud. It clung to her thin frame like soaked paper. Her bare feet rested helplessly against the splintered wood of the post. The wind never stopped. It tugged at her blonde hair, flinging grit across her face, carving thin red scratches into her pale skin. Ash Wolf slid from his pony before it fully settled. Behind him, hoofbeats approached, slow, deliberate. Apache riders came into view. Older men, harder men. Their horses kicked dust as they rode, closer faces, shaped by years of loss and survival. These were men whose hearts had turned to stone because softness had once cost them too much. They saw the girl. Low curses followed. One man spat into the dirt. Her own people left her here, the first said, his voice heavy with scorn. A warning for us, or meat for the vultures. Ash Wolf did not respond. He stepped closer, boots crunching against the gravel. The woman's head sagged forward. Her breathing came shallow and broken, each breath sounding like pain itself. Then the wind shifted. A cloud of dust swept into her face. She flinched weakly. It was barely a movement, almost nothing. But to Ash Wolf it was everything. Proof that life still clung to her. A thin thread refusing to break. Something tightened hard in his chest. A sudden, unexpected remember of protectiveness. She's still breathing, Ash Wolf said quietly. That doesn't matter, another rider snapped. She's white. They took our grazing valley last week. Let her pay for it. Ash Wolf never looked away from her. He noticed the tremor running through her fingers. He noticed the faint blue lines beneath the skin of her wrists, fragile and bruised. This isn't justice, Ash Wolf said, at last, his voice steady but unyielding. This is cruelty. The men behind him shifted in their saddles. Leather creaked. One voice, older, heavier, cut through the air. Boy Stone Crow warned, authority thick in his tone. You were assigned prisoners, not mercy. Leave her where she is, he continued. She's meant to be a warning, Ash Wolf lifted his gaze and wrapped his hand around the coarse hemp rope. A sharp command snapped from one of the Apache riders. Ash Wolf, cut that rope and you cut your duty. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The knife was already in his grip. One swift, deliberate motion, the rope gave way. Claire Hollis fell, her body folded forward, strength long gone. But she never struck the ground. Ash Wolf caught her, pulling her into his chest before the earth could claim her. She was lighter than he expected. Too light. Her body shook violently in his arms, trembling like a spooked colt. Dust streaked her face, mixing with the blood at her temple as she struggled to speak. Her lips barely moved. Dry. Cracked. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let them hurt me." The fear in her voice cut deeper than any blade. Ash Wolf swallowed hard. His throat tightened. "No one is going to hurt you," he said quietly. "I swear it." Behind him, frustrated murmurs rippled through the riders. Boots scraped dirt. But no one stepped forward. They recognized the resolve in his stance. When Ash Wolf decided, something words meant nothing. He adjusted his hold on Claire Hollis, lifting her with care as though she might shatter if handled roughly. He carried her toward his pony. "Where do you think you're taking her?" one man demanded. Home, Ash Wolf answered simply. "That pile of hides you sleep in," another scoffed. "That's no place for a prisoner. It's shelter," Ash Wolf replied. He eased her across the saddle, placing a folded blanket beneath her head, the same one he kept tied behind the rigging. "It's better than letting her die tied to a post." The men exchanged looks, half irritation, half surrender. They knew the old law. Among the Apache Nation, a life claimed was a life owed. If Ash Wolf took responsibility for her survival, no one could challenge it. Not yet. He mounted behind her, securing her fragile body with one strong arm. "Do as you like," Stone Crow muttered, turning his horse away. "But don't expect Red Bear to thank you." Ash Wolf urged his pony east, leaving Judgment behind. Claire stirred faintly against him, her head resting against his chest. Her breath caught a small, pained sound, as if words tried to rise but couldn't. "Easy," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." The ridge faded into heat and dust behind them. Ash Wolf rode fast enough to outrun the sun, but slow enough not to reopen her wounds. The land stretched endlessly, harsh, empty, unforgiving. Miles of red earth and dry gullies passed beneath them, broken only by mesquite trees and lone tumbleweeds drifting like lost spirits. After nearly an hour of silent riding, the shape of his shelter appeared. A modest lodge, stitched hides, stretched over timber poles, patched with scraps of canvas, traded from passing wagons. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't grand. But it was private. And when night came, it held warmth. Ash Wolf swung down from his pony and gathered Claire Hollis into his arms once more, carrying her inside. The air within the shelter held a faint mix of old smoke and crushed sage, a scent that spoke of long nights and solitude. In the corner waited a narrow cot, nothing more than a low frame stacked with tanned deer hides. Ash Wolf lowered her onto it with deliberate care, shifting her gently so none of her bruised muscles were strained. Her breathing remained thin and uneven, and heat radiated from her skin with unmistakable fever. He dipped a cloth into a clay bowl of cool water, wrung it out, and slowly wiped the dust and dried blood from her face. Claire's eyelids fluttered. A whisper slipped from her lips, too soft to understand, before she drifted back into unconsciousness. Ash Wolf pulled a blanket up over her shoulders. Outside, evening light was draining from the sky, washing the desert in gold and violet. "You're not dying today," he murmured, the words meant for no one but the silence. "Not while I'm here." Beyond the lodge, the sun sank beneath the horizon. Inside, the only sound was her uneven breathing and the promise he had just made, a promise he could no longer take back. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Red Bear would demand answers. The Apache Nation would demand judgment. But tonight, his only purpose was keeping her alive. The sky continued its slow burn into purples and bruised orange as the desert stretched endlessly, wide, empty, and merciless. Miles of red earth rolled on, broken only by mesquite trees and lone tumbleweeds, drifting like lost spirits. Through that harsh land, Ash Wolf rode. He kept his pony steady fast enough to outrun the coming dark, yet careful not to jolt the broken woman against his chest. Claire was barely aware of the journey. Her head rested heavily against him, her body slack with exhaustion. Now and then, her breath would catch a rough, broken sound as if words tried to rise and failed, before sinking back into shallow rhythm. He felt the heat of her fever through his shirt, felt how fragile she was, how light her bones seemed as if her life weighed almost nothing in his arms. As the hooves carried them forward, his thoughts turned inward. He was a warrior, trained to fight, to guard, to survive. A man who understood the silence of the hills better than the voices of people. Why had he done this? Why had he cut down a woman meant to stand as a warning? He glanced down at the crown of her head, at blonde hair matted with dust and sweat. She was supposed to be the enemy. Her people were the ones fencing the grazing valleys, carving lines through open land. Yet as he felt the faint tremor of her body against his chest, a heavy realization settled inside him. It wasn't regret. It was the knowledge that her life now rested entirely in his hands. By the time the outline of his shelter appeared, the stars were beginning to flicker awake in the darkening sky. His home was a modest lodge, stitched hides, stretched over timber poles, standing apart from the main camp, a place built for solitude. It wasn't much, but it was solid. And tonight it would have to be a sanctuary. Ash Wolf dismounted his boots, striking the hard earth softly. He lifted Claire Hollis again, cradling her close, and carried her inside. The lodge was still and dark, smelling of old smoke and sage. In the shadows waited the small cot, just layered deer hides ready to bear her weight. He laid her down with careful precision, easing her limbs into rest so nothing pulled at her wounds. When he stepped back to light the fire, the flickering glow revealed just how fragile she truly was. The small fire cast enough light to reveal the truth. Claire Hollis was burning with fever, her skin scorching beneath his touch. Her breaths came quick and shallow, each one a fragile pull for air. Fever was nothing new to Ash Wolf. He had watched strong warriors fight it and survive, and he had watched others slip away despite every effort. But this woman, she looked as though she had never hauled water from a creek or split wood beneath a hard sun. She looked breakable. He knew what had to be done. The wounds along her back where the rope had cut deep needed care. Ash Wolf dipped a cloth into a clay bowl of cool water, then paused just for a heartbeat. His broad, calloused hand hovered near her shoulder. To help her, he would have to undress her. To help her, he would have to cross a line that under any other sky would never be crossed. "Ma'am," he whispered, though he knew she could not hear him. With careful, respectful precision, he loosened the torn fabric at the back of her dress. The cloth was stiff with dried blood and dirt. When it peeled away, angry welts of purple and red spread across her pale skin. Ash Wolf's jaw tightened. This wasn't justice. This was torture. He wrung out the cloth and began to clean her, gently wiping away grime and blood. Claire let out a soft moan, a sound of pain that sliced through the stillness of the lodge. Her eyelids fluttered, fear flickering even in sleep, but she did not wake. Easy, Ash Wolf murmured, his voice low and steady. "You're safe." He moved slowly, his touch far gentler than one would expect from a man shaped by weapons and war. He cleaned the raw burns at her wrists and the deep cuts along her back, then pressed a salve of crushed herbs meant for his own wounds into her skin. When he finished, he drew the blanket up to her chin, covering her completely. Ash Wolf leaned back, running a hand through his dark hair, exhaustion crashing over him all at once. "You're not dying today," he whispered into the firelight. "Not while I'm watching over you." Night settled in fully. Outside, the desert turned cold and silent, broken only by a distant coyote's call and the soft crack of sap in the fire. Ash Wolf did not sleep. He sat cross-legged beside the cot, feeding small pieces of mesquite into the flames to keep the lodge warm. He watched her chest rise and fall, too thin, too fast. He watched as if danger itself might slip through the hide walls and steal her away the moment he closed his eyes. He was the guardian, the watcher in the dark. Hours passed. The fire sank into glowing embers. And at last, as the first gray light of dawn crept through the narrow slit in the hide walls, the woman stirred. Her eyelids opened slowly, pale lashes lifting as if through heavy snow. Claire Hollis lay still, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling of stitched hides. She blinked her mind, struggling to piece together the terror on the ridge with this warm, smoky shelter. Then her eyes shifted. She saw the fire. She saw the walls. And finally she saw him. Ash Wolf sat only a few feet away, watching her. The realization struck her like a blow. She wasn't safe. She was inside the lair of the enemy. Her breath caught. Ash Wolf lifted his hands slightly. Palms open, a universal sign of peace. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe." But the word meant nothing to her when spoken by a warrior of the Apache nation. Panic surged sharp and electric through her body. She pushed herself backward, scrambling away from him. The movement was too fast. Pain tore through her injured back, sharp and unforgiving. Claire Hollis gasped instinctively, clutching the blanket to her chest with white-knuckled desperation, as though he might steal the very breath from her lungs. "What did you do to me?" she choked out, her voice splintering like dry wood. Ash Wolf did not move. He kept his stance easy, his hands open and visible. "You had a fever," he said evenly. "You were hurt." She glanced down at herself, then noticed how loose the dress felt, sensed the cool salve on her skin. Shock drained the color from her face, only to be replaced by a rush of heat fury, tangled with shame. Her blue eyes snapped back to him, wide with accusation. "You!" She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "You took off my dress. You saw everything." Ash Wolf looked away, rubbing the back of his neck like a boy caught in an unwanted misunderstanding. A faint heat touched his ears, a rare sign of discomfort. "I loosened only what I had to," he said, staring into the fire. "The rope burns on your back were bad. I put medicine on them. Nothing more." Claire's jaw tightened. The humiliation cut deep. She had been abandoned to die, and now she lay stripped and exposed in the shelter of a stranger, a man her people whispered about as a monster. "You," she spat the word sharp. "Apache. You savages." The insult lingered in the air, heavy and foul. Ash Wolf flinched barely, just a flicker crossing his eyes. He had saved her life. He had turned his back on his own people for her. And this was what he received. Still he did not rise. He did not raise his voice. He looked at her, his expression hardening into something unreadable. "You can curse me," he said quietly. "But if I hadn't cut you down, you'd be dead." Claire stared at him, breathing hard, her chest heaving beneath the blanket. The truth of his words pressed against her fear. She was alive. She was warm. But terror still wrapped tight around her. Ash Wolf stood slowly and stepped back, giving her space, making it clear he was no captor. "I don't need you to trust me," he said, his voice low and final. "You just need to heal." He turned away, moving to the fire and stirring the embers, offering the only privacy he had left to give. Claire curled inward, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes stayed fixed on his back, exhausted, confused, angry, but alive. And inside that small lodge of stitched hides, the war between them began to change into something neither of them yet understood. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was thick, weighted with unspoken thoughts, tense as a drawn bowstring. Claire sat on the edge of the cot, her back rigid, the blanket held tight like armor. Her stomach betrayed her with a loud, hollow growl. She hadn't eaten in who knew how long. Her ribs showed through the ruined dress, her skin pale as old parchment. By the fire, Ash Wolf stirred a small clay pot. The scent of reheated venison and wild onions filled the lodge, rich grounding. He heard her stomach protest. He felt her stare on his back, burning with fear and anger. He turned, holding out a wooden bowl, steam curling into the air. "You should eat," he said calmly. "I thinned it so you can swallow it." Claire lifted her chin, stubborn fire flashing in her eyes. "I don't want your food." Ash Wolf sighed, not in irritation, but in quiet resignation. He nodded toward her stomach with the spoon. "Your body says otherwise." "I'm not hungry," she lied, her voice cracking. "You're starving," Ash Wolf corrected gently as he stepped closer. Claire Hollis pressed her back against the hide wall. "I said no. I won't take charity from you. I won't take anything from you." Ash Wolf paused. A faint, dry trace of amusement touched his mouth, not mocking, just the look of a man who found the moment painfully simple. "You're shouting from the bed I sleep in," he said deadpan. "You're wrapped in my blanket. You're drinking my water." The stew's a strange place to draw the line. Color rushed into her face, a deep, humiliating red. She opened her mouth to argue, found no ground to stand on, and snapped it shut. She huffed and turned her face away. "Fine," she muttered the word sharp as flint. "But don't stare at me." "I wasn't," he replied evenly. "You were. I was checking your color. You looked like you might pass out. Just give it to me." She reached out with a trembling hand. Ash Wolf hesitated when he saw the weakness in her arm, then placed the bowl in her grasp. The instant she took the weight, everything went wrong. As she lifted the bowl, pain ripped through her bruised ribs like a lightning strike. She gasped. Her arm spasmed. The bowl tipped, hot broth sloshing toward the rim. She was about to drop it, about to spill it everywhere, to look foolish and helpless, but it never touched the ground. Ash Wolf was there in a heartbeat, catching the bowl mid-air, his large hand steadying it before a single drop reached the pelts. He didn't pull back. Instead, he lowered himself in front of her, meeting her at eye level. He saw the look on her face. It wasn't only pain. It was humiliation, raw and complete. The look of a woman who had lost her freedom, her dignity, and now even the strength to feed herself. Tears of frustration burned in her eyes, though she fought them down. "Let me," Ash Wolf said softly. "No," she whispered, her voice thick. "I can do it." "You can't lift your arm high enough," he answered quietly. "The bruises are too deep." I said no. He didn't argue. He didn't leave. He adjusted his grip on the bowl, lifted the spoon, and waited. He didn't push it toward her mouth. He simply held it there, suspended between them, offering her a choice. "Eat," he said. It wasn't an order. It was a plea. Claire glared at the spoon, then at him. She hated him, in that moment, hated that he was right, hated that he saw her weakness so clearly. But hunger gnawed at her, alive and relentless. At last, reluctantly, her jaw clenched tight, she leaned forward and parted her lips just enough. Ash Wolf fed her. He moved with unbearable slowness, one spoonful, then another. The silence inside the lodge changed. It was no longer sharp with anger. It grew fragile, intimate. He watched her swallow, his dark eyes intent, careful, making sure she didn't choke. A single drop of broth slipped from her chin. Without thinking, he brushed it away with the back of his thumb, an act so casual, so domestic, it startled them both. Claire flinched, but she didn't pull away. "That's it," he murmured. He breathed out slowly, his voice a low vibration in his chest. "Just a little more." She did not thank him. She did not meet his eyes. But she finished every bite, and when the bowl was empty and he eased her back against the pillows, the tension between them loosened just enough for both of them to breathe again. That night, darkness swallowed the lodge whole. The fire had dwindled to embers, throwing a faint, dying glow across the lodge poles. Ash Wolf lay on his bedroll near the entrance, listening to the wind claw at the night. He thought she had fallen asleep. Then from the shadows a voice reached him, quiet, reluctant but steady. "Thank you." Ash Wolf smiled into the dark. He didn't turn. He didn't answer. But the walls between them, once tall and unbreakable, formed their first thin crack. The days that followed slipped into a rhythm neither of them spoke of yet, both depended on. Claire Hollis regained her strength slowly, like the sun inching upward after a hard winter. The bruises along her ribs faded from deep purple to sickly yellow. The rope burns on her wrists hardened into scabs. She began to hate lying still. Claire was a woman used to work, used to being useful. Watching Ash Wolf cook clean and haul water while she remained in bed gnawed at her pride. One afternoon, he stepped inside carrying a cracked wooden crate and set it down with a dull thud. "What's that?" Claire asked, sitting up. "Clothes," he said. "Old buckskins, torn shirts, frayed trousers. Most of them are past saving. But I thought you might want something to do." Claire eyed the pile. She lifted a shirt that looked like it had lost a fight with a bear and arched a brow. "You've been wearing these. No wonder you look like a ruffian." Ash Wolf blinked, unsure whether he'd been insulted or teased. "If they bother you," he said, "you can patch them." She scoffed. "I can't sew. Not well." "You patched your own sleeve last night," he replied. She stiffened. "You watched me. It was hard not to," he said simply. "You used my only needle." Her cheeks warmed. She snatched the shirt from his hand. "Fine, but don't blame me if it looks worse when I'm done." Later, when she thought he wasn't looking, Claire settled the shirt into her lap. Her fingers were stiff, her movements clumsy. The thread tangled twice. She muttered curses under her breath that would have made a sailor proud, brow furrowed in stubborn focus. By the fire, Ash Wolf sharpened a knife and forced himself not to stare. Still a warmth settled in his chest that had nothing to do with the flames. She was trying, despite her fear, despite her anger. She was mending his clothes. By twilight, she tossed the shirt at him. "There." He caught it and studied the sleeve. The stitching was uneven, the line crooked and jagged, a mess. "It's crooked," he said. "I told you I couldn't sew." Ash Wolf looked up at her, the corners of his eyes creasing. "It's good," he said softly. "It holds." The next day he surprised her again. Claire sat by the fire staring at the hide walls, her shoulders tight, looking trapped. The lodge, though safe, was small. It had no windows, only a smoke hole above, and the hide flap that served as an entrance. For a woman raised with open porches and wide fields, it must have felt more like a cave than a home. Ash Wolf left without a word. He returned hours later dragging a heavy timber and a weathered sack of tools he had traded for years ago, a hammer, iron, nails, a saw. Claire Hollis stepped outside, lifting a hand to shield her eyes from the sun. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Fixing the place," Ash Wolf replied, grunting as he set the timber in position. "Figured it might feel less like a den if it had a real doorway. Something that opens. Lets the light in." Claire watched him work. Sweat darkened his back. His muscles tightened and shifted as he sawed through the wood. He wasn't doing this for himself. He had lived in this lodge for years without a door. He was doing it for her, to ease a fear she hadn't even spoken. "You don't have to do all this," she said, folding her arms. "Because of me, I know," he said simply. She hesitated. Then why Ash Wolf set the hammer down and wiped his brow with his forearm. "Because you look at these walls like they're closing in on you," he answered. "I'm making more room." Her breath caught. It wasn't a grand speech, but the quiet thought behind it, the way he had noticed, hit her harder than any flattery could have. Still, the moment that truly shifted everything came 3 days later. Claire had mentioned almost in passing how much she missed the green of her family's farm. The desert felt too red, too brown, too dry. That evening, Ash Wolf led her to a small patch of ground beside the lodge. He had spent the morning clearing stones and scrub brush, breaking the sun-baked clay until it was loose and willing. He knelt and held out a small leather pouch. "What's this?" she asked. "Seeds," he said. "Squash, beans, and some wildflowers I traded for a long time ago." Claire knelt, letting the dry soil slip through her fingers. She looked up at him, skepticism tangled with hope. "I didn't think anything could grow out here. The ground's too hard." "Some things can," Ash Wolf replied, "if someone cares enough." He knelt beside her and guided her hand, pressing the first seed into the earth. His fingers brushed hers, warm, rough, alive. Claire pulled her hand back, not in fear, but in sudden confusion. She looked at him, really looked at him. This man who was supposed to be a savage, who was supposed to be her enemy. He was kneeling in the dirt, planting flowers for her. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "You listen to everything I say. You fix the lodge. You bring me seeds. You treat me like I matter." Ash Wolf didn't stop working. He covered the seed with soil and pressed it down gently. Then he lifted his gaze to hers, dark eyes, steady, honest, unyielding. "Because any woman deserves to be cared for," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel softened by velvet. "Even the angry ones." Claire sputtered, her defenses snapping up. "I'm not angry. You are always angry," he countered gently. "And that's all right." He reached out and brushed a smear of dirt from her cheek. His hand lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Women are like flowers," he said quietly. "Claire," Ash Wolf said quietly, "treat them harshly and they shut down. They dry up." He pressed the soil gently with his palm. "But treat them with care. Give them water. Give them sun, and they bloom." She blinked, caught off guard, into silence. The right touch can fill an empty place with something worth seeing. The words lingered between them, simple, poetic, unsettling. Claire turned away too quickly, pretending to study the seeds, but her heart was pounding hard against her ribs. Heat crept into her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. He saw her. Not the prisoner, not the woman left to die. He saw her. In the days that followed, the change was unmistakable. The fear that had once ruled Claire's every breath began to thin, fading into something unfamiliar. Curiosity. She found herself watching him when he didn't realize it. Watching the way he moved with a quiet, lethal grace. Watching how hands shaped by violence became impossibly gentle when he checked the first green shoots pushing through the soil of her garden. And it struck her, sudden and undeniable. He wasn't the monster the stories had warned her about. He was a man, a lonely man, a kind one. One evening, as the sun sank low and stretched long shadows across the desert floor, Claire stood in the new doorway Ash Wolf had built. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of sage and the faint promise of rain. Ash Wolf stood just outside, leaning against a lodge pole, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He stared toward the horizon, his profile sharp and steady against the dying light. Claire stepped out beside him. "The garden looks good," she said softly. He turned his head. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened in a way she'd come to recognize something meant only for her. "It does," he said. "You have a good hand for it." She hesitated, then added, almost teasing, "I thought Apache men were supposed to be fierce." The wind lifted, sweeping a strand of hair across her face. She reached up to tuck it back, and her gaze caught his. The air between them shifted. It wasn't the tension of enemies anymore. It was something heavier charged. The pull between two people who had walked through fire together and survived. Claire let out a shaky breath. The moment felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. "I should go inside," she whispered. "The stew." "Go," Ash Wolf said. But he didn't move. She stepped forward to pass him. The doorway was narrow. as she brushed by her arm grazed his. The contact sent a jolt through both of them. She froze. He froze. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of them breathed. She felt the warmth of his body, the solid strength only inches away. An irrational urge surged inside her, to lean into him, to rest her head against the chest that had shielded her from the world. She looked up. His eyes were dark, searching hers, asking a question he dared not speak. The longing there was raw, almost frightening. Then the moment broke. Claire ducked her head and hurried inside her heart, fluttering like a trapped bird. Ash Wolf remained in the doorway, staring out at the darkening desert. Slowly he lifted a hand and touched the place on his arm where she had brushed against him. Inside the lodge, Claire pressed her back to the wall and closed her eyes. She lay awake, listening to the sound of Ash Wolf's breathing, just beyond the hide wall. They were walking a dangerous edge. They were enemies by blood, by history, by war. Yet inside this small shelter beneath the vast western sky, those hard lines were beginning to blur. And for the first time since her world had gone up in flames, Claire Hollis realized she didn't feel completely alone anymore. She felt seen. And more unsettling still, she felt safe. But safety along the borderlands is never more than a passing thing. As the moon climbed high and silver above them, neither of them knew that peace was already slipping away. The world beyond their small refuge was moving toward them, and it would not come with the gentleness of a gardener's hand. The sun hovered low on the horizon, stretching long, bruised shadows across the desert floor. It should have been a quiet evening. The air cooled, settling into that sacred stillness that comes just before night claims the land. By the stream, Claire finished rinsing the clay bowls, the water cold against her fingers. She walked back toward the lodge with a soft hum in her throat, a tune pulled from a childhood that felt impossibly distant. She paused beside the garden patch. Tiny green shoots pushed stubbornly through the red soil, defiant, alive. She smiled at them, feeling a small answering bloom open in her chest. Near the doorway, Ash Wolf worked on a spear shaft, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the corded strength of his forearms catching the light. He looked up at the sound of her steps, not sharply, not like a warrior searching for danger, but warmly, like a man recognizing something that belonged to him, if only for a moment. In that golden hour, they were simply two people carving out a life at the edge of nowhere. Domestic, quiet, safe. Then the desert reminded them that safety is an illusion. The sound came first, a low vibration felt through the ground before it reached the ears. Hoofbeats. Fast. Too many to be a patrol. Ash Wolf set the spear aside at once. His body shifted, the relaxed calm falling away as the warrior resurfaced. He moved in front of Claire without thinking, placing himself between her and the open land. Inside he murmured. She didn't argue. She slipped into the lodge and pressed her back to the far wall, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. Outside, the hoofbeats thundered closer, churning dust into the air like an oncoming storm. Then silence. Heavy. Suffocating. The silence of judgment. Voices rose beyond the lodge, harsh, demanding. And then one voice cut through the rest, recognizable not by tone alone, but by the weight of authority it carried. Ash Wolf, come out. He exhaled once, steadying himself, and stepped into the light. Claire crept to the doorway, peering through a narrow slit in the hide. 7 Apache riders formed a tight half-circle around the lodge, the war circle. Their faces were grim, painted for intimidation. At their center stood Red Bear. The chief's iron-gray braids hung heavy against his chest, his gaze cold enough to cut through desert heat. He dismounted slowly, boots striking the earth with finality. He looked at Ash Wolf, not with rage, but with a deeper wound, disappointment. "You shame your people," Red Bear said, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "I trusted you with a prisoner." Ash Wolf stood straight, unflinching. She was dying, That was the point. Red Bear snapped, his control cracking. She is white. Her people have taken our grazing lands. Red Bear said, his voice cold and unyielding. They have fouled our wells. This woman was meant to be a warning. His gaze hardened. You were never meant to bring that warning into your home. Claire Hollis stifled a gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Heat burned her cheeks, not for what had been done to her, for she had only struggled to survive, but for the insult cast upon Ash Wolf's honor. She is not in my bed, Ash Wolf replied, his jaw set. Red Bear's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the lodge, the garden, the repaired doorway, the signs of care. Do you deny she sleeps under your roof, that you feed her, that you shield her? His voice sharpened. We saw what you built. Ash Wolf, a garden, a home, all for her. Behind him, the war circle muttered a ripple of disgust passing through the riders. To them, this was betrayal laid bare. She is innocent, Ash Wolf said again, unwavering. No white man, woman, or child is innocent, Red Bear snapped. They claim the ground they walk on. They claim our very breath. He stepped closer. I charged you to guard her, not to keep her, not to treat her like a wife. Ash Wolf met the chief's stare. I treat her like a human being. The silence that followed pressed heavy and suffocating. Red Bear's eyes flashed with dark fury as he closed the distance, standing nose to nose with the man who had once been his finest scout. Then you are no longer one of us. The words fell like a hammer. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Pack your things, Red Bear commanded. You and the girl are banished. From this moment on, neither of you will set foot on Apache Nation land again. Ash Wolf did not plead. He did not argue. He did not ask for mercy. He nodded once. Claire could not stay hidden any longer. Trembling, she stepped out of the doorway and stood behind him. Red Bear sneered. The stray dog now stands with the stray girl. Ash Wolf moved instantly, placing himself between the chief and her, blocking the stair completely. You will not speak to her that way, he said firmly. I protect what is mine to protect. Red Bear scoffed as he mounted his horse. Then go. Take your white girl and leave. You are no longer Apache. The riders wheeled and thundered away, a cloud of dust, rising and stinging Claire's eyes. For a long moment the world stood still. The only home Ash Wolf had ever known was gone, taken in a single breath. He turned to her. Claire searched his face, tears carving clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never meant for you to lose your home. Ash Wolf shook his head gently. Don't apologize. I chose this. But your tribe, your land, Claire, he interrupted softly. He reached out his hand, hovering near her face. From the moment I cut you down from that post, I knew saving you might cost me everything. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Not for me. I would do it again, he said simply. There was no hesitation in his voice, no regret, only a terrible, beautiful certainty. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice breaking. Ash Wolf took her hand, his fingers threading through hers. We find a new place, he said. You and me, that's enough. And so as the sun sank behind them, they turned away from the ridge. They left the lodge. They left the garden she had just planted. They walked until the sky bruised purple and the first stars blinked awake, turning strangers into exiles, and exiles into partners. They stopped miles later beside a narrow creek winding through a stand of cottonwoods. Water murmured over smooth stones, a gentle voice in a hard country. Ash Wolf gathered fallen branches and coaxed a small fire to life. Claire Hollis settled onto a downed log, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders as she watched him work. There was confidence in the way his hands moved, the easy strength with which he split and placed the wood. Power lived in him, steady, unbreakable. She drew a slow breath. We really can't go back. No, he said, nudging the fire with a stick. And you're not angry? He lifted his eyes, the flames painting his face in warm orange. "I'm not angry." "Why not?" Her voice wavered. "I cost you everything." Ash Wolf shook his head, moved from the fire, and sat beside her on the log. The space between them was gone now. "My people turned their backs long before you," he said quietly. They just finally said it out loud. He reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was careful, gentle, as if he still feared she might break. She didn't. She leaned into him. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Leaving everything to help me?" "I don't regret a thing," he said. His voice lowered, intimate and raw. "From the moment I saw you, hanging from that post, I made my choice. I'd make it 1,000 times over." Claire looked up and met his gaze. In the firelight, she saw not possession, not pity, but something deeper. Something that had grown in the quiet of the lodge, in shared meals, in seeds pressed into stubborn soil. "I thought you hated my kind," she whispered. "I thought you were the enemy." "I never hated you," he said. "And you're no enemy of mine." Tears pricked her eyes, but they weren't born of sadness anymore. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for protecting me." Ash Wolf drew a quiet breath, half laugh, half disbelief. The walls were gone. The fear was gone. He leaned in. Claire didn't pull away. She tipped her face up as his lips met hers, tentative. At first, a question asked in the dark. When she kissed him back, clutching his shirt, the kiss deepened, unraveling every knot of fear inside her. It was a kiss of relief, of gratitude, of a love that had taken root against all odds. The world narrowed to warmth, breath, and the soft brush of his mouth. When they finally parted, they stayed close, foreheads resting together. They were homeless. They were outcasts. Tomorrow they would have to search for a valley, a stretch of ground where the soil didn't care what skin they were born with. But tonight, they had the stars. They had the fire. And beneath the endless western sky, two people who had once feared each other found the only thing that truly mattered, a place to belong. They would carry that with them, wherever the trail led next. And that, my friends, is where we leave Ash Wolf and Claire Hollis. Tonight, their story settling into the soil of the West. A quiet reminder that love can rise from the harshest ground and turn strangers into a home. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Ash Wolf's choice? Would you have done the same? And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with a friend who could use a little hope. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a tale from the Wild West. I want to thank every one of you who's ridden along with us this past year. To my loyal listeners, your time and open hearts mean the world to me. I wish you a happy new year. May your trails be safe, your fires be warm, and may you find your own place to belong in the year ahead. I hope you'll continue riding with the channel as we uncover more untold stories of the frontier. Thank you for listening. Signing off. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voice-over visual scripts, as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.